Sir, please. I haven't eaten today. The elderly woman stood outside the London bakery, staring through the glass at a loaf of bread. People walked past her. Businessmen hurried toward their offices. Luxury cars stopped at the traffic lights. Nobody stopped. Then Michael Carter saw her. He was only a janitor. His uniform was worn. His shoes were old. And the little money in his pocket was supposed to buy dinner for his own family. He looked at the bread. Then he looked at the woman. And he made a decision that would change his life forever. Wait here. Michael walked inside. He bought the bread with the last cash he had. When he returned, the woman stared at him strangely. Why would you do this for me? Michael smiled. Because tomorrow, it could be me standing here. The woman lowered her eyes. But Michael didn't notice the black luxury car waiting across the street. He didn't notice the driver standing beside it. And he certainly didn't know why the driver had been watching him. Because the elderly woman he had just fed wasn't homeless. She wasn't helpless. And she wasn't a stranger. She was Evelyn Harrington, the billionaire CEO of the very company where Michael worked. But there was one thing Michael didn't know yet. Evelyn hadn't come to that street looking for someone to help her. She had come looking for someone she could trust. And what she witnessed next would make her question everything she believed about the people working inside her company. Because Michael's act of kindness was only the beginning. The next morning, London woke beneath a blanket of gray clouds. Inside Harrington Global's towering headquarters, everything looked perfect. Polished marble. Glass elevators. Expensive suits. Important meetings. And people who seemed to have everything. But Michael Carter moved quietly through it all. He pushed his cleaning cart down the executive corridor, carefully wiping fingerprints from the glass walls. Nobody noticed him. That was normal. Michael had learned that in wealthy places, people often notice the floor becoming dirty before they notice the person cleaning it. But Michael didn't complain. He simply worked. Because every evening, he returned to a small apartment where his wife, Sarah, waited for him. Their life wasn't luxurious. There were bills. There were worries. And there were days when Michael wondered how long they could keep going. But every morning before leaving home, Sarah always told him the same thing. Don't let difficult circumstances change the kind of man you are. Michael carried those words with him. That morning, while cleaning the executive floor, he noticed something unusual. The elderly woman from the bakery was standing near the reception area. The same woman. The same modest coat. The same quiet expression. Michael stopped. You. The woman looked at him. A faint smile appeared. You remember me. How could I forget? Michael glanced at the bread bag in her hands. You managed to eat? The woman nodded. Yes. Because someone reminded me that kindness still exists. Michael smiled. Then he returned to work. But the woman didn't leave. She watched him. She watched how he greeted the receptionist. How he picked up a document someone had dropped. How he helped an elderly visitor find the correct elevator. And how he never once asked anyone what they could do for him. He simply helped. Finally, the woman asked, Michael, do you work here every day? Yes, ma'am. And are you happy? Michael paused. He looked toward the enormous windows overlooking London. Some days are difficult. Then he smiled. But God has given me another day. So I have something to be grateful for. The woman's expression changed. She had heard executives speak about success. She had heard investors speak about money. She had heard managers speak about targets. But she hadn't heard many people speak like Michael. Before leaving, she asked one final question. If you suddenly had everything you wanted, what would you do? Michael laughed softly. Everything. Yes. He thought about it. Then his answer surprised her. I'd make sure nobody around me had to beg for what I once struggled to afford. The woman stared at him. Michael didn't notice the emotion in her eyes. He picked up his cleaning cloth and continued working. But the woman walked away carrying something far more valuable than the bread Michael had bought her. She was carrying a question. Could a man who had so little truly be trusted with much more? 3 days later, Michael arrived at work before sunrise. The executive floor was unusually quiet. He noticed an envelope lying beside the private elevator. There was no name on it. Michael picked it up. It was thick. Far too thick to be ordinary paperwork. He looked around. Nobody was there. He opened it slightly. Inside was a large amount of cash. Michael froze. His first thought wasn't luxury. It was survival. The electricity bill. The overdue rent. The groceries Sarah had been carefully stretching. For several seconds, Michael simply stared. Then he closed the envelope. This isn't mine. He took it straight to the security desk. But something strange happened. The security officer looked at the envelope and frowned. I didn't see anyone leave this here. Michael's eyes narrowed. Then someone must be looking for it. Maybe. Michael walked away. But as he turned the corner, he noticed the elderly woman from the bakery standing across the lobby. Watching him. Their eyes met. Michael smiled politely. The woman didn't smile back. She simply watched. Then she walked away. Michael didn't understand. Later that morning, another situation unfolded. An executive assistant accidentally spilled coffee across a stack of confidential documents. She panicked. Everyone around her began blaming one another. Michael quietly stepped forward. Don't worry. I'll help you clean this. The assistant looked surprised. You'll get in trouble if you're near these documents. Michael nodded. Then tell your supervisor I was helping. He carefully moved the papers away from the spill. He didn't read them. He didn't photograph them. He didn't even look at the information. He simply did what was necessary and walked away. But someone was watching. High above the lobby, behind the tinted glass of a private office, Evelyn Harrington stood silently. The elderly woman from the bakery. The woman Michael thought was simply someone in need. She had changed her clothes, removed the modest scarf, and walked into the building through a private entrance. Her appearance was completely different. A senior executive entered the room. Mrs. Harrington, the board meeting begins in 20 minutes. Evelyn turned toward him. Cancel it. The executive looked confused. Cancel the board meeting? Yes. Why? Evelyn looked down through the glass. Michael was below, pushing his cleaning cart. Because I have discovered something more important. The executive followed her gaze. The janitor? Evelyn nodded. His name is Michael Carter. Do you know him? Evelyn's expression became thoughtful. Not yet. She turned toward her desk. Find out everything about him. The executive hesitated. Everything. Evelyn looked directly at him. His work history. His family. His financial situation. His character. Then she added, and don't let him know I'm asking. The executive left. Evelyn remained alone. She opened a drawer. Inside was a file containing the names of several employees. At the top was Michael Carter. But beside his name was something unusual. A handwritten note. Possible candidate. Evelyn stared at it. Then she quietly whispered, let's see what he does when nobody is watching. And Michael had no idea. The greatest test of his character had already begun. The following morning, Michael noticed something strange. Evelyn was back. She was sitting quietly near the entrance of Harrington Global, wearing the same modest coat and carrying the same old handbag. Michael stopped when he saw her. Good morning, ma'am. Evelyn looked up. Good morning, Michael. He smiled. You remembered my name. Some people are worth remembering. Michael didn't know what to say to that. He glanced at the small paper bag beside her. Have you had breakfast? Evelyn shook her head. Michael looked at his watch. He was already running late. His supervisor had warned everyone that morning that the executive floor had to be spotless before an important meeting. Michael reached into his pocket. There was only enough money for his own breakfast. He hesitated. Then he looked at Evelyn. Wait here. A few minutes later, he returned with a fresh loaf of bread and a warm drink. Evelyn stared at them. Michael, I didn't ask you to buy me anything. I know. Then why did you? Michael shrugged. Because you looked hungry. Evelyn's eyes remained fixed on him. You don't have much yourself. Michael smiled faintly. That's true. Then why give away what you need? Michael sat beside her for a moment. Because sometimes having little doesn't mean you have nothing to give. Evelyn became silent. Those words touched something deep inside her. But before she could respond, Michael's supervisor appeared. Michael. Michael immediately stood. Yes, sir. The executive floor isn't finished. I'll be there. His supervisor glanced at Evelyn. Again. Michael's expression changed. She's just having breakfast. His supervisor sighed. Just make sure you don't forget why you're employed here. Michael nodded. I won't. He returned to work. Evelyn watched him disappear down the corridor. Then she reached into her handbag. She pulled out a small notebook. Inside were several observations. Michael Carter. Kind when nobody is watching. Gives when he has little. Doesn't seek recognition. Evelyn slowly closed the notebook. But then her phone rang. She answered quietly. Yes. A man's voice came through. Mrs. Harrington, there's been a problem. Evelyn's expression hardened. What kind of problem? It's regarding the company. She stood. Tell me everything. The man's next words made Evelyn look toward the corridor where Michael had disappeared. Someone is trying to manipulate the company accounts. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. And how much? The man gave her the figure. Evelyn became completely still. Millions were at stake. She looked down at Michael's notebook. Then she whispered, maybe the test needs to change. Because now Michael wasn't simply being tested for kindness. He was about to be placed near something far more valuable than money. Trust. And someone inside Harrington Global was about to discover just how difficult it was to fool a man who had nothing to prove. By noon, the atmosphere inside Harrington Global had completely changed. Executives were moving quickly through the corridors. Phones were ringing. Doors were closing. Whispers followed every passing manager. Michael noticed immediately. Something was wrong. He continued cleaning. Then his supervisor approached him. Michael, I need you in the executive office. Michael looked surprised. Me? Yes. Now. Michael followed him upstairs. Inside the executive office, a senior manager stood beside a desk. A thick folder was waiting. The manager pointed toward it. Take this downstairs to accounting. Michael reached for it. Then stopped. Where exactly? Third floor. Finance department. Michael nodded. He picked up the folder. But as he turned, the manager called him back. Michael. Yes. If anyone asks what you're carrying, tell them it's cleaning inventory. Michael frowned. Why would I lie? The room became silent. The manager stared at him. It's not your concern. Michael carefully placed the folder back on the desk. Then maybe someone else should take it. The manager's expression changed. Are you refusing an instruction? No, sir. Michael remained calm. I'm saying I don't understand why I should give false information about something I haven't been told about. The manager stared at him for several seconds. Then he picked up the folder. Fine. Forget it. Michael turned around. As he walked toward the door, he noticed Evelyn standing in the hallway. The elderly woman. The woman he'd been buying bread for. Michael smiled. Good afternoon. Evelyn nodded. Good afternoon. She looked at the manager. Then at Michael. Did something happen? Michael shook his head. Nothing important. Evelyn studied him. You could have gotten into trouble. Maybe. And you're not angry? Michael smiled. Getting angry won't make the truth clearer. Evelyn's eyes softened. Then she asked. Michael, what matters more to you, your job or your integrity? Michael didn't hesitate. Integrity. Evelyn nodded slowly. Even if it costs you your job? Michael looked toward the London skyline. My job helps me pay my bills. He paused. But my character is what I take home to my family. Evelyn's eyes filled with emotion. Before she could answer, A senior executive rushed toward them. Mrs. Harrington. Michael froze. Evelyn turned. The executive stopped suddenly. His face went pale. Michael looked between them. Mrs. Harrington. Evelyn said nothing. The executive quickly lowered his voice. Your driver is waiting downstairs. Michael's expression changed. Driver? He looked at Evelyn's worn clothes. Then at the executive. Something wasn't adding up. Evelyn noticed the suspicion on his face. Michael. But before she could finish, the executive's phone rang. He answered. His expression changed instantly. What? He listened. Then looked toward Evelyn. It's the board. Evelyn's voice became firm. Put it on speaker. The executive obeyed. A voice filled the hallway. Mrs. Harrington, we've discovered that the financial documents were deliberately altered. Michael stood completely still. Evelyn looked at him. Then she said something that made Michael's heart stop. Bring the documents to my private office. The executive nodded. Yes, ma'am. Michael stared at Evelyn. Who are you? For the first time, the elderly woman's gentle expression disappeared. She looked toward the enormous glass doors leading to the executive wing, then back at Michael, and quietly said, You've been calling me Evelyn. She paused. But that isn't the name the people in this building use when I walk through those doors. Michael's eyes widened. Evelyn turned toward the private elevator. The doors opened. Before stepping inside, she looked back at him. Come with me. Michael didn't move. Why? Evelyn gave him a mysterious smile. Because tomorrow, everyone in this building will learn what kind of man you really are. The elevator doors closed. Michael remained standing there, and for the first time, he wondered whether the elderly woman he'd been buying bread for had been watching him from the beginning. But he still had no idea just how powerful she really was. The private elevator opened onto the highest floor of Harrington Global. Michael stepped out slowly. He had never been there before. Everything looked different. The polished marble, the enormous glass walls, the breathtaking London skyline, the portraits of past company leaders. But Michael barely noticed any of it. His attention was fixed on the woman standing at the end of the corridor. Evelyn. The elderly woman he'd bought bread for. She walked toward a massive set of wooden doors. Then she stopped. Come in, Michael. Michael followed. The doors opened into a magnificent executive office. A long conference table stood beneath elegant lights. Several senior executives were already waiting. The moment Evelyn entered, every person in the room stood. Michael stopped. One of the executives spoke. Good afternoon, Mrs. Harrington. Michael looked at Evelyn, then at them, then back at Evelyn. Mrs. Harrington? Evelyn slowly turned toward him. Yes. Michael's face changed. Who are you? Evelyn took a breath. Then she walked to the head of the table. I am Evelyn Harrington. She paused. The founder and chief executive officer of Harrington Global. Silence. Michael stared at her. The woman he thought needed help buying bread. Owned the entire company. The company where he worked. The company whose marble floors he cleaned every morning. Michael shook his head in disbelief. You're the CEO? Evelyn nodded. Michael looked down at his uniform. Then at the executives surrounding him. One of them quietly smiled. But Evelyn raised her hand. Don't. The smile disappeared. Evelyn looked around the room. For 3 days, I walked through this city dressed like someone nobody important would notice. She looked at Michael. And he noticed me. Michael remained silent. Evelyn continued. He didn't know my name. He didn't know my position. He didn't know I had money. He only knew that I was hungry. Michael lowered his eyes. Evelyn turned toward the executives. And when he was given an opportunity to deceive someone, he refused. She placed a folder on the table. This is the financial investigation. Everyone became serious. The person responsible has been identified. A senior executive's face changed. Evelyn looked directly at him. You abused your position because you assumed nobody was watching. She pointed toward Michael. But you were wrong. Michael looked stunned. Evelyn's voice softened. Michael was watching. Not because he was trying to expose anyone. Not because he wanted a promotion. Not because he knew I was watching him. He simply chose to do what was right. Michael finally spoke. Why did you test me? Evelyn looked toward the window. Because I am surrounded by people who want something from me. She turned back. Money. Power. Positions. Influence. Then she looked directly into Michael's eyes. I wanted to know whether there was still someone who would do the right thing when there was absolutely nothing to gain. Michael swallowed. And the bread. A faint smile appeared on Evelyn's face. That was never part of the test. Michael looked confused. What? Evelyn's expression became emotional. I really was hungry. The entire room became silent. Michael almost laughed. You're a billionaire. Evelyn smiled. Yes. But you could buy the whole bakery. I could. Then why? Evelyn looked at him. Because sometimes you don't discover people's hearts by giving them something. She paused. You discover them by needing something from them. Michael finally understood. Evelyn reached across the table. I want to offer you something. Michael immediately shook his head. If it's money. It's not. Evelyn pushed a document toward him. Michael looked down. His eyes widened. It was a promotion. Community Outreach and Employee Welfare Director. Michael stared at her. You want me to do this? I want you to help me build something. This company has been missing. Michael looked confused. What? Evelyn smiled. A culture where people are valued before they are measured. Michael looked at the document. Then at Evelyn. I don't know if I'm qualified. Evelyn smiled. Neither did David when he stood before Goliath. Michael looked at her. Evelyn continued. God doesn't always begin with someone who looks qualified. Sometimes he begins with someone willing. Michael looked down. And for the first time, the janitor who had spent years feeling invisible realized something. Maybe God had been preparing him long before anyone noticed him. 6 months later, something had changed inside Harrington Global. The executive floors were still beautiful. The offices were still enormous. The company was still one of London's most successful businesses. But something was different. People were being noticed. Employees who had worked for years without recognition were finally being heard. Families struggling financially received support. A community food program had been established. And the first person Evelyn asked to oversee it was Michael. One evening, Michael stood outside the same London bakery. The same place where everything had begun. He watched people walking past. Then he noticed an elderly man sitting alone near the entrance. Michael walked toward him. Good evening, sir. The man looked up. Michael smiled. Have you eaten? The man shook his head. Michael walked inside. A few minutes later, he returned carrying 2 loaves of bread. He handed one to the man. The other remained in his hand. The elderly man stared at him. Why are you doing this? Michael smiled. Because someone once did it for me. The man looked confused. Michael glanced across the street. Evelyn was standing there. She wasn't wearing expensive designer clothes. She wasn't surrounded by executives. She was simply watching. Michael smiled at her. Evelyn smiled back. Later that evening, Michael returned home. Sarah was waiting. She looked at him. You look different. Michael smiled. Different how? Like something happened. Michael sat beside her. You remember that woman I told you about? Sarah nodded. The one you bought bread for? Michael laughed. Yes. Sarah smiled. What about her? Michael looked at his wife. She owns Harrington Global. Sarah stared at him. What? Michael laughed. I know. Sarah covered her mouth. You bought bread for your CEO? I didn't know she was my CEO. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. Then she smiled. And what happened? Michael became quiet. She gave me a position. Sarah's smile faded. What position? Michael looked at her. Employee welfare and community outreach. Sarah stared at him. You're not a janitor anymore? Michael shook his head. No. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Then Michael added, but I'm still going to remember what it felt like to be one. Sarah reached for his hand. Michael looked toward the small Bible resting on the table. He opened it. His eyes fell on Proverbs 19 verse 17. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord. Michael sat quietly. Then he whispered, maybe that bread wasn't just for her. Sarah looked at him. Michael smiled. Maybe God was teaching me that kindness is never wasted. The following Sunday, Michael stood in a small church in London. He didn't speak about the promotion. He didn't talk about Evelyn's wealth. He didn't talk about how his life had changed. He simply told the congregation about a loaf of bread. A few months ago, he said, I thought I was giving away the last thing I could afford. He paused. But I discovered something. The church became silent. You can lose money and recover it. You can lose a job and find another. You can lose possessions and replace them. But when you lose your compassion. Michael shook his head. That's much harder to replace. Evelyn sat quietly near the back. Michael looked toward her. And sometimes, he continued, God allows you to meet someone who looks like they have nothing. He paused. Because he wants to reveal what you have inside you. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Michael finished. Never underestimate a small act of kindness. Never assume nobody sees what you do. And never think your circumstances make your kindness worthless. He closed the Bible. Because sometimes the bread you give away. He looked toward Evelyn. Becomes the beginning of a blessing you never expected. The congregation applauded softly. Evelyn stood. Michael smiled. And for a moment, neither of them needed to say anything. A janitor had bought bread for an elderly woman. He thought he was simply helping someone who was hungry. But God had used one small act of kindness to open a door neither of them expected. Michael didn't become valuable because he received a promotion. He was valuable before anyone knew his name. And Evelyn didn't become worthy of kindness because she was a billionaire. She was worthy because she was human. That was the lesson Michael carried with him. Kindness doesn't ask for a person's status before it gives. And sometimes, the smallest thing you place into someone's hands can become the beginning of something much bigger than you ever imagined. Because when you do good when nobody is watching, God sees.